This world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton.
Oh, yeah, I can see the thing's body now. It's large as a bear. Glistens like wet leather, but that face, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It strikes him head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. The whole field's caught up by the woods. The fires are coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
60 years ago tonight, the city of New York lay in ruins. The state of New Jersey had been declared a disaster area, and the entire U.S. Air Force had been downed by a seemingly unbeatable enemy invader.
Ladies and gentlemen, incredible as it may seem, those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars.
At least, if you believed what you heard on the radio. I'm Jim Cameron. On Halloween Eve, 1938, an estimated 1 million listeners actually thought America was under attack from Martian invaders. People panicked. They ran into the streets. They packed up their families and headed for the hills, all because of a radio play. An adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, a broadcast so explosive, it changed media forever. The War of the Worlds panic broadcast happened 60 years ago. But we continue to wonder today, how could people have believed something so outrageous? Was it intended as a mean-spirited hoax, or simply a chillingly good ghost story for a Halloween Eve? In order to find the answers, we need to travel back in time to the fall of 1938, to an era when a magical gadget filled with glowing tubes and a vibrating speaker was fast becoming the focal point of America's households. Back in the 30s, long before television and with talking pictures still in their infancy, radio was mass media, the only game in town. From breaking news to soap operas, dramas and comedies.
There is a doctor in the house, a physician who, without anesthetic, sets your funny bone, tickles your ribs, and splits your side.
It brought the world into your home and workplace and made you a part of it.
Suddenly, a third of the population was listening to one show every night. This took a nation of immigrants and made us a people, made us Americans.
Bring up the boys, man. Tell them meet me at Pine Creek Forks. The Flying Bee payroll's been robbed. Tell the boys to ride.
The radio was on 24 hours a day. It was a silver tone, was the name of the radio, and it had an eye. And you knew you were tuned in when the eye resembled most a human eye. It doesn't make any sense, but the eye seemed to be part of the family.
Americans passionately loved and trusted their radios. They turned to them for comfort during the Great Economic Depression and relied on them for up-to-the-minute news as Adolf Hitler's military aggressions in Europe grew more threatening by the day. Listeners also depended upon their magical talking boxes for entertainment, for a few precious moments of fantasy and escape from their daily lives.
Radio is the theater of the imagination. Radio is the theater of the mind.
Hold up there! We'll set fire to the gap and stop. Whoa! Hold on. Swim.
The listener at home created the images. They created what the characters looked like.
Where's your pa, Junior?
He's back on the far section with the Reaper.
There's another form of popular entertainment that also draws on the power of the imagination to work its sorcery: science fiction. In the 1930s, most sci-fi came in the form of four-color comic strips and lurid pulp magazines, or B-movies about planet-hopping cowboys with names like Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. Their idea of special effects was primitive, to say the least.
We must destroy that ship.
I'll drop down on it. Dock off. Radio the Earth.
You laugh hysterically if you see them now. I mean, it's obvious, a man holding up a kitchen pot or something, and somebody with cigarette smoke, you know, what we believed as a real rocket ship then. It sounds really dumb now, but we did.
There was one man working on the cutting edge of radio who saw past that hokiness and envisioned science fiction's dramatic potential. His name was Orson Welles, the 23-year-old boy genius of the New York stage and a popular voice-for-hire actor on the airwaves. Welles instinctively understood that the persuasive power of radio, plus the outlandishness of science fiction, could yield explosive results.
Orson loved science fiction. The thing he always said about science fiction was that it was magic, because you were inventing universes that didn't exist. He knew that everybody had their own demons, so if he just gave you the right background music for the demon, you would create the demon for him.
Welles also believed that combining science fiction with radio might help solve his most pressing problem: ratings. His own radio show, the Mercury Theater on the Air, was winning rave reviews, but nobody seemed to be listening. The show couldn't even attract a sponsor. With Halloween just around the corner, Welles and his partner, producer John Houseman, were looking for a way to spark their ratings by giving the audience a good scare. They set their sights on War of the Worlds, a novella by the father of sci-fi, H.G. Wells. Just 6 days before Halloween Eve, Wells ordered staff writer Howard Koch to update this 1898 tale set in Victorian England into an edgy, modern American thriller.
It basically becomes almost a whole new story. I mean, they've got the title, but they can't do it in the modern day without making a lot of changes. And Koch kept trying to beg out of it and saying, I can't do it. And they kept saying, you have to.
New York, the Queen Mary.
Koch and Wells agreed on the technique of breaking news updates to give the production an immediate and contemporary feel. They couldn't have imagined then how fateful a decision using that technique would be. In the early evening of Sunday, October 30th, as the Mercury players readied themselves for their live broadcast, across the nation, millions of families were clustering around the consoles in their kitchens and living rooms, settling in for an evening's entertainment. They were blissfully unaware that for the first time in history, science fiction and radio were about to merge, with unimaginable results.
Well, I was 11 years old, living in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Sunday night was radio night for us, and the kids were allowed to stay up later.
In the small town of 2000 in Missouri, where I grew up, right in the center of Missouri, very little of the outside world had seeped in yet then. And so the man across the street had a console radio, and he had invited us over that night to listen to radio.
Sunday night, Halloween Eve, 1938. At 8 p.m. Eastern Time, over 30 million Americans turned to their radios for a little relief from news of a depression ending much too slowly and warnings of war in Europe much too quickly on the rise. Those who tuned into CBS heard this straightforward introduction.
The Columbia Broadcasting System and its affiliated stations present Orson Welles and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
We know now that in the early years of the 20th century, that as human beings busied themselves about their various concerns, they were scrutinized and studied, perhaps almost as narrowly as a man with a microscope might scrutinize the transient creatures that swarm and multiply in a drop of water.
To those tuning in to the beginning of the broadcast, it was perfectly clear that Orson Welles was narrating the opening of a suspenseful drama.
In the 39th year of the 20th century came the Great Disillusionment.
There was only one problem. 90% of the listeners never heard Orson Welles in his poetic prologue. What were they listening to? To a phenomenon of radio ratings, the Chase and Sanborn variety show, starring ventriloquist Edgar Bergen and his sidekick, Charlie McCarthy, the most wooden performer of the era.
Aren't you going to do anything for a little itsy-bitsy Charlie? On this Halloween?
Oh, I may tell you a ghost story.
The Chase and Sanborn show featured Edgar Bergen and Charlie in a comedy sketch for the first 10 minutes or so of the show. Then Nelson Eddy, Hollywood singer, at a low point in his career, came on.
We ride men who are happy and free, birds of a feather who travel together, good soldiers of fortune.
And a lot of people decided to see if there was something they could listen to on another channel. The War of the Worlds is the first recorded instance of channel surfing or zapping.
By this time, the broadcast had donned its Halloween disguise, masquerading as an ordinary evening of radio programming.
Orson was counting on the fact that within radio, a lot of people tune in at all different times. He said, how can I make it as believable as possible? He said, by making it as mundane as possible.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. From the Meridian Room in the Park Plaza Hotel in New York City, we bring you the music of Raymond Raquello and his orchestra. With a touch of the Spanish, Raymond Raquello leads off with La Comparsita.
I was 70, something like that at the time. I was lying on the floor in a crummy hotel. We were on the 9th floor, I think. By we, I mean my mother and my aunt and myself. And I was doing some homework, and as teenagers often do, wanted a little background music, so I flipped around the dial, reaching up to a radio on a counter, until I heard some nice dance music.
Ladies and gentlemen, we interrupt our program of dance music to bring you a special bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. At 20 minutes before 8 Central Time, Professor Farrell of the Mount Jennings Observatory, Chicago, Illinois, reports observing several explosions of incandescent gas occurring at regular intervals on the planet Mars. The spectroscope indicates...
It didn't seem at that point at all preposterous. Mars does exist, and it may be as entitled to explosions as any other part of the universe is.
We now return you to the music of Raymond Raquello in downtown New York.
The news bulletin came and went with little fanfare. But listeners gathered more closely around their radios when they heard that a world-famous astronomer was getting involved.
Ladies and gentlemen, following on the news given in our bulletin a moment ago, we are ready now to take you to the Princeton Observatory at Princeton, where Carl Phillips, our commentator, will interview Professor Richard Pearson, famous astronomer.
Professor, would you please tell our radio audience exactly what you see as you observe the planet Mars through your telescope?
Nothing unusual at the moment, Mr. Phillips. A red disk swimming in the blue sea. Transverse stripes across the disk. Quite distinct now because Mars happens to be at the point...
Many audience members didn't realize that astronomer Pearson was only a character, played by Orson Welles himself.
Conditions peculiar to the planet.
The news reporter, Carl Phillips, was also portrayed by an actor, Frank Reddick.
In your opinion, what do these transverse stripes signify, Professor Pearson?
Huh. Not canals, I can assure you, Mr. Phillips. Although that's the popular conjecture of those who imagine Mars to be inhabited.
Princeton University added prestige to the newscasts. And now that enables the events to proceed with this prestige and authority behind it.
Ladies and gentlemen, here is the latest bulletin from the Intercontinental Radio News. It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton.
Grover's Mill, New Jersey? It is a real place, though blink and you'll probably miss it.
Mill's a little town in West Windsor that doesn't have a post office. It's just a mill, that's all, and there's a little community around there.
Why did they pick on Grover's Mill? That's what they couldn't figure out. Why did they pick on us?
In his mandate to adapt an English science fiction shocker for an American radio audience, scriptwriter Howard Koch needed to find...
Speaking from the roof of Broadcasting Building, New York City, the bells you hear are ringing to warn the people to evacuate the city as Martians approach. People are holding service here below us in the cathedral. The enemy is now in sight above the palace.
This world was being watched closely by intelligences greater than man's.
It is reported that at 8:50 p.m., a huge flaming object, believed to be a meteorite, fell on a farm in the neighborhood of Grover's Mill, New Jersey, 22 miles from Trenton.
Oh, yeah, I can see the thing's body. Now it's large as a bear. It glistens like wet leather, but that face, ladies and gentlemen, it's indescribable. I can hardly force myself to keep looking at it. It strikes him head on. Lord, they're turning into flames. The whole field's caught up by the woods of the fires. They're coming this way now, about 20 yards to my right.
60 years ago tonight, the city of New York lay in ruins. The state of New Jersey had been declared a disaster area, and the entire U.S. Air Force had been downed by a seemingly unbeatable enemy invader.
Ladies and gentlemen, incredible as it may seem, those strange beings who landed in the Jersey farmlands tonight are the vanguard of an invading army from the planet Mars.
At least, if you believed what you heard on the radio. I'm Jim Cameron. On Halloween Eve, 1938, an estimated 1 million listeners actually thought America was under attack from Martian invaders. People panicked. They ran into the streets. They packed up their families and headed for the hills, all because of a radio play. An adaptation of H.G. Wells' War of the Worlds, a broadcast so explosive, it changed media forever. The War of the Worlds panic broadcast happened 60 years ago. But we continue to wonder today, how could people have believed something so outrageous? Was it intended as a mean-spirited hoax, or simply a chillingly good ghost story for a Halloween Eve? In order to find the answers, we need to travel back in time to the fall of 1938, to an era when a magical gadget filled with glowing tubes and a vibrating speaker was fast becoming